Welcome back to the Postpartum Plan podcast. This podcast is designed to support and empower you through postpartum. Whether you're expecting, in the early postpartum days, or beyond, this space is for you. I'm your host, Madison Fugere, a dedicated postpartum doula and pediatric sleep consultant, striving to help parents feel confident and supported in their parenting journey. Each week, I'm sharing practical tips and expert advice to help you navigate all the postpartum things with confidence. Well, as much confidence as you can. Let's embark on this journey together, making your parenthood as serene and supportive as possible. Karen Tanso is a pediatric physical therapist and the owner of Inchstones PT LLC. She's also a new mom of a 4-month-old baby, and she's passionate about teaching parents and caregivers how to help all children reach their greatest potential. Alrighty, we finally made it to the record button after talking for like 20 minutes off camera because I have Karen with me today. Thank you for joining me.
Of course. Thank you for having me back.
It's a good time when you're here. We were just talking about how all the different things when it comes to businesses and all the things, and we should probably like actually hit record now and like do the things we have to do and since we both don't have that much time. So now we are here diving into all of the things crawling, which I'm super excited about. I had Karen on last season, so you guys can head back and check it out. But today, yeah, we're going to talk about crawling and we're going to talk about all of the importance of it and how to get your kiddo to get that mastered, right? Yeah. So do you want to just give everybody a quick, I know obviously you've been on before and your intro will play, but like a quick little blurb info about you and what you do, and then we'll dive into all the things crawling.
Sure. So I've been a PT for a little over 10 years now, and I've always specialized in pediatrics. So I knew basically when I was a little kid that I wanted to be a pediatric physical therapist, and people were like, "What? How do you even know what that is?" Um, we'll probably get into this later because it's kind of relevant to crawling, but I actually fell down the stairs in one of those baby walkers when I was a baby. And so I needed PT my whole childhood, all the way up until throughout, like when I did sports in high school. So I knew what physical therapy was at a young age. I knew that there were some people that just worked with kids because remember thinking my physical therapist when I was younger and I had a lot of neck pain from that
Mhm.
injury was I thought she was magical. So when I was 6 years old, I wrote a story about how I wanted to be a pediatric physical therapist.
Oh my
And so
gosh.
I knew it was something I always wanted to do. I went to school, I specialized. My clinical was at Texas Children's Hospital in Houston, Texas. So I specifically picked somewhere that I knew would be all peds experience. And, you know, right from the get-go, I just started working in pediatric clinics. I have pediatric experience in the schools, in home, and I started my business, Inchstones PT. And the name is from the milestones that we're going to talk about, one of them being crawling. I break them down into what we call Inchstones. So I work with a lot of patients, babies, toddlers, older kids, big kids, that might have a diagnosis or any disabilities, and they might not meet some of these big motor milestones. So I might be working with a 12-year-old that isn't able to sit. So, we have to look at the Inchstones. And so a lot of parents in the disability, special needs parenting world, know what Inchstones are. So I just love that, and with my business now, I kind of break down the milestones into the Inchstones. So it's kind of like, what else are they doing? The parents are always like, my baby's not sitting, they're not crawling. What do I do? Are they delayed? And I'm like, well, what are they doing? What are the little Inchstones that they're doing in between? So
Yeah.
I started my business 3 years ago now, which is wild to say out loud.
Ah.
And it's been a little bit of a whirlwind since. And I just had my baby. He's 4 months now, and we were just talking. I was talking to Madison about 4 months sleep regression last week, and now here we are.
You're
So
living through it. Last time we
yeah,
were recording, I think you were pregnant.
yeah.
And yeah, so it's so crazy yeah, you now have come full circle, right? You now get to do it as your job and come home and do it in your own personal life. And I do. I love when you get to talking about your business name and the whole Inchstone idea because I think it's so important for people to kind of realize that there are steps in between. And I think a lot of the time people are just thinking about the big, like big milestones, right? And aren't realizing that there are other things happening or not happening that's causing them to not be able to or to be able to meet those bigger milestones. And being able to kind of, I feel like it gives you like a glass half full situation, right? When you're focused more on like, okay, but they are able to do this and they are able to do that. Feels so much better than being like, oh no, they can't do this.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing with the crawling milestone is that it was taken off of the CDC checklist. So that's kind of what we're going to dive
Right.
into today. But that was taken off when they updated it in 2022. And it's funny because I was at the pediatrician for our 4 month well visit, a few weeks ago, and I grabbed the pamphlet, and sure enough, it's updated. They have the new ones, and crawling's just not there. And like it's just like
Crazy.
it's so frustrating. And the big reason why they did that, which I get it, is because there's so much variation in development.
Right.
But they're totally taking it off of the checklist. So parents aren't realizing the big, big, big importance of what crawling is, and future coordination and milestones really depend on, a little one being able to crawl. And so we can definitely get
Absolutely.
into that. But it's just funny, being on the parent side of it and like, wow, so at the 9 month or, the 1 year, they're not even going to ask me if my baby's crawling. And that's huge. So
Right.
it
Well, and
is
I think it's like to look for those things because that's your life, right? But especially first-time parents don't know any different, right? And I
absolutely.
think everybody obviously wants what's best for their kid. And like you said, obviously every single milestone is going to have, such a varying age bracket for it. But I do think that recognizing what we should be striving for and kind of like what stage of development children are in is so important. So to take it off was like crazy. I know there was a lot of controversy and talk around the updating guidelines and milestones that were released back then. Yeah, do you want to walk us through kind of what some of the milestones are on that checklist, and then we can kind of explain why having crawling on there is so important?
Yeah, a lot of therapists were really upset by it. And so what I did was I immediately started my crawling camp play group. So I developed my crawling guide, I put it on my website, and I started doing play groups. I do in-person baby play groups. That's as a wellness sort of offering that I do with my business at
Hmm.
Store Ready in North Reading, Massachusetts. And I do those weekly. So yeah, and when I saw that they took that off, I decided to make the guide and then have classes. So
Yeah.
because I wanted to educate, and parents are coming to my class. Like first time parents are coming to the class because they heard or they're not sure that crawling's important, or they're like, oh, well, if there's a crawling class, then maybe it is important, even though we're not,
Hmm.
thinking about that. So really what happened was they update their milestones, every few years or so. In 2022, they did a major update to which meant they're going to rebrand all of their pamphlets, flyers, all of their education and everything. So they try to look at the research and they try to look at studies. And the thing with crawling is there just wasn't enough research and there weren't enough studies that they could pinpoint an age that babies should crawl. And so with the general milestone checklist, like we have the big ones like rolling, sitting. They skipped the crawling one, which would be right after that. And then, standing and walking. So they were able to look at all the studies and all the data that we have out there and give an average for when, like, I think it was 75% of the population is sitting by this age. So that's when they're going to put it on the milestone checklist. So they didn't have that kind of data with crawling because for one, there is so much variation with crawling. It's
Hmm.
based on parent report, and parent reports differently for what crawling is. So whether it's army crawling or hands and knees crawling, and some babies walk first before they crawl, and some they will say they'll skip crawling. I don't really, necessarily agree with that, but some babies do walk before they crawl, but then we want to see that they're crawling at some point,
Right.
even if they're already walking. Like I work on crawling with babies who are really good at walking. So
Hmm.
that's why they kind of like weren't able to pinpoint an age that they said, okay, this is when like, the majority of the infants in typical development, we're not talking about, children with delays or disabilities or anything like that. And we're talking about full term babies when we give these ages. So they just couldn't come up with the date. They couldn't come up with an age. And so they just took it off. And by taking
Which
it
is
off,
crazy.
yeah, by taking it off, I think it just like really I don't know if they knew the impact of like taking that skill off would have, but when we take something off of a checklist, then we don't think about it anymore. And that's
Right.
kind of where we get nervous as therapists.
Absolutely. And I think that like it's one of those things that you even ask people about. Okay, like, well, yeah, you're sitting and now you're standing. And people are like, huh? No, something's missing, right? Like there is something in between there. And I think your point of like crawling is such a variety of things, right? Because you see the kiddos that are army crawling, you see the kiddos that are like hands and knees crawling, you have your butt scoochers, right? And they're sitting and they're scooching. And so it is, I think it's such a variety. Whereas, like, okay, standing is standing and walking is walking. Like it's very easy to kind of like differentiate those movements. So yeah, it's so crazy to me. And I was baffled. I remember at the time when those were released, I either had just left the daycare or was about to, because I left in the middle of 2022. And I remember being like looking at all of the other people and be like, no, 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 we're still leaving those on our like checklist, right? Like we're still leaving those on our developmental checklists, like for child evals, right? Because we were like, what do you mean? Like these are really important things. And I know we're gonna dive into a little bit more about what benefits happen when you crawl and what can happen when we quote unquote skip crawling, right? And why, like you just said, it's really important to even go back to crawling if need be, if your kiddo is walking, right?
Yep.
So yeah, do you want to walk us through kind of like what are children missing and what are you noticing if they are quote unquote skipping crawling? And what's the benefit of kind of going backwards and getting them to do that again? Hey guys, it's Madison. Yeah, I'm here interrupting myself, but I wanted to take a minute to talk about something that can feel so overwhelming as a parent, sleep. So, if you are in the thick of the sleepless nights, struggling to figure out how to get your baby and yourself to get more rest, then I want you to know that you're not alone. Here's the thing, if what you're doing is working for you, great, keep doing it. But if it's not, there are resources to help, and I'm happy to be one of them. As a certified pediatric sleep consultant, I work with families to create personalized sleep plans that actually make sense for your current and unique situation. No cookie cutter advice, just practical strategies that match your parenting style and your child's personality. Because let's be real, sleep is not a luxury, it is a necessity. So, if you're ready to make a change, I'd love to help. You can book a free sleep connection call on my website, www.serenemomentsdoula.com, or reach out to me on Instagram at serenemoments.doula.
Yeah, so my business is really focused on the under one population when it comes to my marketing and my social media and my website. But as a pediatric physical therapist, I work with across the age span of up to 22 years old and sometimes older. You know, I might work with a 50-year-old who has Down syndrome or a 40-year-old who has cerebral palsy, because these are sort of pediatric, you know, chronic congenital
Right.
conditions or disabilities. And so when I worked in the clinics, I was often treating older adults with disabilities. So, you know, just because my business and everything I market and all that is based on the infancy, I definitely treat older kids both in my private practice. I also work at a school and I, of course, treat school age children in the schools. And so when I'm doing an evaluation, I'm doing an intake, if they're older and say they're 5 years old and they're having a hard time with higher coordination skills like skipping or running, you know, one of the first things I ask is, did they crawl? And anecdotally, you know, I haven't looked at all the data of all the evals I've done over the years, right? But anecdotally, like the children who have a hard time with these bilateral coordination, so that just means like being able to use opposite sides of your body at the same time or
Mm-hmm.
in reciprocal patterns. So you're using different sides of the brain. They often report that their children skip crawling. And
Yep.
so we know now, like even though there isn't enough research that the CDC felt to put an age on it, we do know, and there is a lot of research out there that shows the benefits of crawling. And it's really every single system in the body, from the eyes, the brain, the eye-hand coordination, writing when they get older, like being able to read because you have to, you know, look to one side of the page and go to the other. When you're writing, you have to cross midline and
Yep.
bring your hand across when you're writing, right? Because we go from like left to right. Those are all bilateral coordination activities. Skipping, you know, being able to throw a ball. because you have to step with your opposite leg and throw with your opposite arm, right? That's the form for throwing. So
Yep.
all of these things can be traced back to crawling because that is when the brain is developing. The big one, like I mentioned, vision. When baby's crawling and they're moving on hands and knees position, they're integrating some of the primitive reflexes. So those are reflexes that babies are born with, usually for survival and also to just like get them through the birth canal. That's why they exist. But when they're crawling and they're down on the ground and they're looking and their head, when they're changing their head shape, they're the where their head is looking and their eyes are looking, the orientation of their head and their vision is huge for like so much for development. So they might be crawling over like a patterned rug. So they're taking in all of this sensory visual information when they're crawling. We also might see that they're working on depth perception. So when baby starts crawling, they're going to be crawling like over things or upstairs or
Yep.
maybe over an obstacle or a parent or a couch cushion. So that's all working on like depth perception, that which is huge for babies. Fun fact, crawling when you develop depth perception doesn't necessarily translate to walking, being able to have depth perception because the orientation of your body is like so different.
So
So
different.
your baby might get really good at like crawling over the little step that you have in their kitchen, but then when they learn how to walk, they are not going to remember that step in your kitchen is there. So yes, it is interesting that I've had parents say, I don't understand. They crawl over this every day. And then they started walking and why can't
Yep.
they figure it out? So yeah, so it really, there's so many benefits. And then obviously when we think about like strength and like motor of the whole body, we're thinking about core strength, hip strength, leg strength, all these things, arm strength, shoulder strength. Like it's really the benefits of crawling are unreal. And a lot of times there's some, adult therapists that work in the adult functional medicine world, and they actually have patients, with chronic pain or whatever it might be. They actually have them go through the developmental skill. And like, it's funny to see that some adults don't know how to crawl.
It's crazy. Well, I literally can tell you that thinking right now as you were talking, and I was like, oh yeah, like, kiddos crawling, we're always on the floor with them, and like you kind of like you do the couple of crawls and then you watch them and they'll do a couple, right? You kind of like mimic each other. And I remember vividly, I don't remember which of my family members it was like my brother or my dad or something, trying to crawl with one of the babies. And I was laughing at one point because watching them try to actually do it is hilarious because as an adult, you don't do it very often. So
Right.
when you think about crawling, you can't overthink it. You just have to do it. And trying to even think about like when you were talking about bilaterally, like how the body's moving. I don't know if I could even imaginatively picture or explain to you which arm moves first. I think I would just need to crawl to do it, right?
Yep.
Um, and so it does. It makes you think about all of these kind of milestones that get a little bit warped, right? Like you have to make sure that you are having these movements in order to see that like gross motor milestones, right? Um, it's so huge. It's so huge. And I think it's one of those moves and one of those things that I mean, I guess there's multiple things in baby and infancy that kind of makes me think of this, but when children like skip this, milestone or this step, there's a couple things in life that happen where like they skip them and then you go, oh no, they're fine. Like they don't need it. They're still being able to walk and they're still being able to crawl and they're still talking or whatever. But then like you said, right, like down the line, you realize like, oh, like they are struggling with this or they've been just kind of like doing this move in a different way than like they probably should be because they didn't know how to do that or whatever. And I think that people don't realize that there's like later repercussions to not being able to do small things like crawling, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think too, babies, adults, people, everyone, humans really compensate for, where our deficits are. So babies become really good at compensating and doing the easiest thing.
Right.
Whether it's they are crawling, but maybe they're only really using like one side of their body, or
Hmm.
they're only crawling and they're only using their right arm and their left leg their right arm, right leg to move, and the left side is just kind of like hanging out, coming along for the ride, if you will.
Yep.
So as therapists, like it might be okay and it might later progress that they're using both sides of the body, but usually we're going to look at that and be like, why are they compensating? Like, why is that easier?
Right.
It's the same thing with rolling too. Like some babies only roll to one side and then they're like on to sitting. And like you said, they might have never rolled to that side. So why? Like,
Right.
is there neck strength issue? Is there neck tightness? Is there a core strength issue? Is why we don't want to see asymmetries in babies, especially under one. So handedness, whether you're going to be right-handed or left-handed, really should only develop and sort of show itself after 18 months, sometimes up to even 3 years. So a lot of times I will see babies 4, 5, 6 months old, and the parents will be like, "Oh yeah, they're right-handed." I'm like, "Oh, why do you think that?"
Right. That's a
Oh,
really
they
good
do
point.
everything on the right side. And it's like, well, that could be because of something. And we need to kind of like
Something
dive
else.
into that a little bit,
That's
investigate.
really, really cool to know. I mean, I knew that there is kind of that like delayed, right hand, left-handedness, but I didn't realize it was that much farther along. That's really cool to know. I feel like it is the cross body and midline stuff and being able to like be so coordinated goes to so many things. And like you were just talking about with rolling, right? You have to roll kind of both ways. And I think even as humans, we kind of like forget that as adults, when we're trying to help babies roll and like teaching them, we kind of forget to roll them both ways sometimes.
Yep.
Or even like when they're sitting, right? I feel like we so often put like a toy right in front of them and remembering that like we should put toys to one side that they kind of have to lean and grab and like cross their body to grab something, right? Rather than just, making everything so easy in a way, right? Like we have to be able to teach them how to do the things that are challenging in order to grow and develop.
Yeah. And like it really brings up a good point of, babies do need to get a little bit frustrated sometimes to
Yeah.
learn because you have to figure it out a little bit. And like case in point, I wanted to get a workout in today, and my son was playing on the floor, and he was like fussing and whining, and like if my feet weren't strapped into that bike, I probably would have like went and tended to him a lot earlier than I did. But I was like, come on, we got a couple more minutes, and like what? He actually ended up being on the floor for 20 more minutes after that, and he was just frustrated and upset for whatever reason. I think one of the balls he was playing with like rolled away, and he's not rolling, a lot right now yet. So like it's just one of those things where he figured it out. He found another toy and he was fine and he was happy and content. But if I, maybe even myself as like,
Right.
I consider myself sort of an expert in development, right?
Yeah.
I would have probably went over to him and maybe picked him up off the ground and like that would have been it for floor time. But
Right.
because I literally was like stuck in the bike and I knew if I had gotten off, I was not going to finish my workout. It worked out. Like he didn't get super upset and it was okay. And I think if, certainly with parents, like environment is key. It's key, especially nowadays when you walk into Target or even going online or Amazon or whatever, and you're just thrown all these products at you. And that's like a whole nother podcast for another day. But
Oh yeah.
safe, open floor play where babies can figure things out on their own and the toys, like you said, aren't right there for them to just grab and you're not
Yep.
constantly like handing
Handing
them
them this,
toys.
handing them that.
It's
Yeah.
interesting. And it's funny. I often see little ones that are the second or the third sibling, and they're sitting, and we call them happy sitters, and
Uh-huh.
they're not crawling, and they might be 9, 10 months. And I go to do the eval, and the first thing I notice is like, oh, because they have two older babysitters,
Yeah.
just giving them toys, like
Oh,
running. Need
100%.
to move their bodies. Literally, they're getting handed everything to them, and they're just watching a show of their older siblings every day.
Oh yeah. You say that and it literally vividly brings me back to one of these kiddos that I had at the daycare who was in our young toddler room. He was like 13, 14 months. He would sit, he didn't want to crawl, he didn't want to pull up, he didn't want to walk, and we would laugh and we'd talk to mom and dad at drop off and they'd be like, "Listen, he's the fourth boy. Like
Yeah.
he just gets handed all the things he wants. If he makes even a sound, like she goes, I turn around to get to him and one of the brothers is already there like doing whatever, right? Happy sitter, perfect way to put it. And I think that so many people think, oh, well, they're content, like that's fine. And to an extent, sure. But also, like you said, letting them be a little frustrated is really like a good thing. And I guess that kind of like leads me into question of it all, right? At what age now, since we don't know an age bracket based on these milestones that were being handed from the pediatrician and all of the other professionals here, when are we looking for, signs of crawling? When should we be encouraging these types of things? Is it based on age? Is it based on like the abilities of the child? And how can we really support our kiddos in getting that crawling milestone down?
Yeah, so first is sitting, which typically is around like 4 to 6 months, independent sitting. And then we want to think about babies getting into and out of sitting, so transitioning in and out of sitting. So that's usually, so say your baby sits around 6 or 7 months, then the next month, that's what we're going to look at. That's what we're going to focus at is that them getting in and out of sitting. And then we're going to think about them moving around on their bellies on the floor. So in tummy time, tummy time is not just until 3 months, 4 months, 5 months old.
Right.
Like, we want to be doing tummy time well into their, school age children. So we think about on their bellies, like we want them to move. So is that like army crawling? Once they get really good at tummy time, they can push up their arms. You might see them go backwards first.
Yep.
It's a form of more mobility because it's easier to push backwards than it is to pull yourself forward. Then we're going to see like them pivoting in a circle. So we want to see that, around like that 6 to 8 months, trying to like push up and sit and on their bellies and then like move to the side.
Mm-hmm.
And then we want to see that they'll pop up onto their hands and knees and, being able to like move or at least reach for things or at least hold that position. So if they can hold that hands and knees position and reach for a toy, so they're really only weight bearing through like 2 legs and one arm, that's how we start to crawl. So we know
Mm-hmm.
that they'll almost be ready. So, on my website, on my social media pages, which I'm sure we'll link here as
Yeah.
well, I break down the crawling Inchstones and I said I would never create like a guide that has ages to it because really my whole philosophy around my business is Inchstones. But I do have a guide on my website and it every it's like a general check off what your baby should and could be doing and activities you can do to facilitate that. So typically we want to see around 7 to 9 months that, your baby's starting to move somehow. And it might not be that like beautiful reciprocal 4 point hands and knees crawling, but we do want to see that they're able to move somehow on the floor. And that really comes from like open, free, unrestricted floor play. So try to ditch the containers as soon as you can, and not putting them in unless you like absolutely have to.
Right.
Instead, creating like a safe space. So like on a mat on the floor, if you have pets or siblings, maybe you need to gate it off, right? So we're thinking about we just have mats on the floor right now because my son's 4 months, but I am already shopping and looking for a gate to kind of go around it to kind of have that free space, that open,
Yeah.
that now that his wake windows are getting longer, I want to be able to, leave him when he's content playing on the floor and
Right.
not have to worry about one of the dogs jumping on him by accident or something like that.
Absolutely.
So definitely having those, we call them yes spaces. So like everything in there is a yes. So if you
Yeah.
literally got locked out of your house and your baby or your child was in that space, they'd be safe. And
Right.
so I try to think about that, when I'm setting up the environment and just having things just away from them. So they have to like work a little bit to get it and reach
Yeah.
for it. Having different heights available. So not just like everything on the floor, having couch cushions down on the floor, having block, like little blocks that they can crawl up onto, having things they can kneel at. Those like play cubes are really good. So it's really, really, really important about like setting up the environment. I do have a guide to crawling that's on my website available for purchase. And basically, it goes through, you should be thinking about after your baby's able to sit, what's next. So, we're not just sitting and then nothing happens, like so much
Right.
happens after sitting and before crawling. So I talk a lot about different activities you can do in sitting. One example, like you said, is placing the toys like off to the side so maybe they can side sit or reaching off to the side, reaching out of that base of support and then
Yeah.
oops, they just fell. Maybe they fell that down to their bellies, but then they're like, wait a minute, I just got from sitting to my belly. How did that happen? And
Right.
but which is why it's important to have like that safe space and sort of like a nice mat or a cushy rug for them to play on. And then after that, we're thinking about like getting up from their bellies into sitting position. That helps with crawling. So, setting up your environment and also just knowing that there's a lot of things that happen between
Right.
sitting and crawling. And then I give, different activities for reaching. And then I do talk a lot about kneeling. So on their knees and playing, you can start that 6 to 7 months old in, propping them up at like I said, a couch cushion or one of those like activity cubes and have them in their on their knees is a really, really great way to kind of introduce that weight bearing through their knees that we
Yes.
need for crawling.
I love it. And like we kind of bring it back to the whole business same idea, right? Like there's so many little inch stones in the process of getting from sitting to crawling. And definitely check out Karen's guide. I will for sure have everything linked below so you can check out her free guides and the crawling and tummy time guides or whatever it is that you are at with your stage with your little one. But yeah, having like an idea as to what to do next can be really helpful because obviously every person wants to do what's best for their kid and wants to see them to grow and develop. And it can feel really overwhelming with so many different things out there, especially with like age brackets, like you mentioned. But sometimes it's nice to know, okay, where do I start? What do I look for? And like I will also say, and I tell a lot of my clients, if you're finding resources and you're like, oh yeah, this is where my kiddo's at, like I'm gonna work on this next, but the timeline doesn't match up, don't worry about it. Like there's so many different timelines. So I think it's more important just to find like where your kiddo's at in development and then okay, what's next, right? And I think that's what those guides are really great for. So I'm super happy that you have that one all set up so people can go check it out.
Yeah, and after if your baby's already walked, learned how to walk, it's okay to try to figure out how to get them to crawling. And maybe you might need to be a little bit more creative because
Right.
typically babies who are walking, they just want to walk and they just want to
Uh-huh.
be, or even babies that know how to stand, maybe they're just often placed into standing by the parents. They just want to be in that upright position. So the parents might think, oh, they don't want to crawl or like, they
Right.
can't crawl or so you might have to be a little bit more creative, but that's where things like obstacle courses where they sort of have to crawl over, under. I love tunnels for learning how to crawl because, some, they literally, that's the
Right. They
only way
can't
out is to,
stand.
yeah, is to crawl. So I certainly also have like an Amazon storefront with different activities and products and sort of just like ways to set up your environment so that you are putting your baby in the best place for them to succeed at learning these higher level skills. Because it's sometimes like babies just do it. And it's
Right.
like parents don't even have to think about it. And then maybe their second, it's different and they need help. So they're like, I work a lot of time with second or third time moms too. It's not just all first time moms because
Yeah.
maybe their first baby didn't just did things because babies
Things are
just
so
do. It's
different.
wild,
Yeah.
it's just crazy how some babies just do it and you don't even have to think about it. You don't even have to set up their environment at all. But then others, they just need help, and they
Right.
need a little motivation, or maybe they need a little cueing, or they need a little handling from a professional like a PT or an OT, and certainly reach out and I think the other biggest thing too is like you don't need your pediatrician's okay, and you don't need your pediatrician's referral. In many, many states now, we have direct access. You can just self-refer. You can self-refer to someone like me, who's a private therapist, or your state should have an early intervention program you can self-refer to. You don't need your doctors, and you definitely don't need to wait the next 3 months of not seeing your doctor at the next
Right.
well visit for them to give you the green light to reach out to someone. We want to
Absolutely.
have you go with your gut. And then, the internet nowadays, you can Google things, you can find someone local. And people reach out to me from all over the US with different resources, and I'll generally try to help them, find a local either provider or just figure out their state early intervention program.
I love that. I think it's so important. Yeah. I feel like there's so many resources out there. There we go. So definitely take advantage of it. And oh my gosh, yeah, trust your gut. You know what's best and know that there are resources out there. So thank you for sharing all of that with me. Definitely check out all of Karen's info below and go head over to her website, find the guides, join her email list. You'll get all the goodies. And oh, and Instagram too, because you have all the videos up there, which are super helpful to see. Because obviously, with an episode of a podcast like this, it's a lot harder to talk about it, a lot easier to see. So go check out those videos too. But overall, you'll head over there, you'll see all of the information, and you guys will be good to go. Thank you for joining me, Karen.
Awesome. Thank you for having me again. It's always so fun to chat with you.
Yes. Thank you so much for tuning into the Postpartum Plan podcast. I hope that today's episode brought you support, relatability, and valuable insight. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a review and share with any of your prenatal and postpartum friends and family. Your feedback helps us reach more parents seeking support. And if you're looking for additional resources, please feel free to connect via Instagram at Serene Moments Doula for constant information, tips, and tricks, or check out my website, www.serenemomentsdoula.com. See you next week.